Josh, you have your altar there? Oh, okay.
Sure.
Your black and red altar?
Black and red altar, is that what it looks like?
I'll let you.
Sorry, I'm dressing a little informal today. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. But it's a little glary behind you.
Yeah, and close these blinds.
And which point it will get dark. Now it's too dark.
Okay, I'm going to light out.
Okay. There you go. Is it just you there in your apartment?
Me and a cat.
The two easiest inhabitants? The two least demanding inhabitants?
Not sure I would say that.
No? The cat is difficult?
No, I think I might be a little more demanding than my wife.
Okay. You have a different...
Yeah, when they're in that like stretch of really humid days, I just had
That looks very good.
I had to get rid of some of it. It was just too hot. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. Did you need me to do anything with the document you sent me, or you just wanted me to have
I
it?
just wanted you to have it in case something screwed up.
Yes, to that point, actually. I'm working off a hotspot right now on my phone, so usually sometimes it goes very smoothly. The last hour or so, I have been having issues, so if I cut out for whatever reason.
All right. Well, Carter was saying that Carter said at the last meeting he was doing stuff behind the scenes.
That's why, yeah, I had that sense. Yeah, no, is he going to be here?
Yeah, but was he? I thought I was doing everything and you were doing what I wasn't doing.
I think if I didn't react quick enough, then he would step in. Yeah,
Okay.
I noticed that something was happening sometimes.
Oh, okay. I thought it was.
Yeah. But he was trying to let us do our thing.
All right. Well, good. That's what we want.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Yeah. I'm glad to know that he'll be here for that.
All right. Were you able to find out about our setting up a little nook in the website for this?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think. There's I think at one point we were just someone might have been Carter or Bob. Every committee having their own page, because we can do that now with our new website. We can just create pages as we want. So this might be a good time to start that. And just have a land use committee page, and we could have that as a resource.
All right, that would be great.
Yeah. Alternatively, I'm trying to think. There was another idea I had. Actually, nope. That was about it. I think. Yeah. We have the bulletin board page, but we don't really use it like that. So yeah, I think that might be our best thing. Maybe just start creating a land use committee page.
Okay.
And putting that on there.
And maybe the equity committee could use that also.
I believe, did we set one up for them? I thought we did. Let me check.
Oh, so, all right. So you've done it for other committees.
Well, we did, we've done it for like the working groups. Yeah, equity work. Yeah, the working groups have pages. Committees don't yet have pages. So, but I think that is something that was being discussed.
Because then we could put this up there after we do it. And there were also some, not links, but there were actual documents that I was sent. And if I could post the documents on that page, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, you're not referring to the links on the agenda right now?
Additional documents.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think we can definitely make that.
Sitting on my computer that I could just send you and you can do it however you want.
Yeah, not a problem. Definitely do that.
Okay.
I downloaded a new app for a clock.
Okay.
Good to go.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
I want to make sure it was you can really see it.
Right. It's very authoritative.
Wow.
So did you go anywhere this summer? Do anything?
Yes. Well, July 4th, my mom has a house in Nantasket we've talked about, so we went there for July 4th week. And then
was
my
it
uncle
crowded
has.
at all, or you were completely? Was the beach crowded?
Well, she lives on Beach Ave, like in like the private section, so it's never crowded there, and it's especially not crowded now. So it's really nice. Otherwise, no, little trips here and there. We went to the Hamptons this past weekend. My uncle has a house out there. Yeah, that's about it.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only big trip was July 4th weekend.
Mm-hmm.
How about
Well,
yourself?
now would be a really nice time to go back there.
Yeah, we were going to do it over the long weekend in case we couldn't go to the Hamptons because it was all putting together. We were putting together last second, but the drive is just, it's very long.
Mm-hmm.
Very long.
We used to make
Yeah.
that, we used to make the drive every year for Thanksgiving with my parents. And it either took 3 hours or 8 hours. You know, we never knew what we always like packed up lots of food and.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's why I'm not like, I don't love the idea on like a long weekend because it could be that. It could be just
Yeah,
spend a whole day in the car, especially with kids.
What are you doing for childcare though? You have a nanny, right?
No, oh, no. Our kids have been in daycare for the last like 2 months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. My son's like daycare never closed. We just took him out for a while and then brought him back and we felt it was safe enough. Other parents were doing that. It's a very small, it's like a family home daycare. So it's like a grandmother. And then, yeah, my daughter, her daycare opened up for, not like officially, but it opened up to a very small group of kids. So yeah, no, so we've actually been very fortunate that we have kids of that age.
Yeah.
The city's prioritizing those institutions.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So for the last like 2 months, me and my wife have been working without distraction at home. It's been very nice.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 panelists and 7 attendees, I guess. All right, so I see Coral here. Do we elevate her because she's a board member or what?
I'm not sure what the protocol is. I think maybe that's your call. We could. I'm happy to.
Yeah, I thought that was in my notes that we would.
I know we do that for executive. I just didn't know about the board committees. You want to do that?
Sure. Thank you.
Sure.
And she has her hand up already.
There's Carter too.
Hey guys.
Hey Carter. Josh, what did we want to do about the chat? Did you limit it to the committee members?
No, we'll just leave it open to the public because that's how people can ask questions.
Okay.
And provide other information. I think we've got a lot of knowledgeable people who are joining us.
So we're going to open it up to all panelists and attendees?
Yeah, I already did that. So it's all open. Unless there's a problem, we've been leaving it open to everybody.
Oh, I see it now. Okay, great.
That's you behind the scenes, Carter.
Oh, I'm just surprised Josh didn't tell me he was running this meeting. So usually I run them all, so.
Okay.
Well, Frederica asked me personally, so yeah.
Well, I'm just doing what we did 2 months ago, so.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. Michael Levine here.
Hey, Michael, nice to see you.
Same here. Frederica, have you been back in the city lately to your city home?
Yes, I have.
Have you noticed all the open air restaurants surrounding your building? They're everywhere on 6th Avenue.
Yes, I've noticed the lack of parking spaces too.
You can't park in this neighborhood anymore before 10 o'clock at night. It's impossible.
To attendees who have their hands up, just to let you know that our protocol is to have a presentation, have committee members ask questions, and then open it up to comments and questions by the public. So you're welcome to leave your hand up, but you won't be called on until after the presentation and the committee member questions. We'll wait another couple of minutes and get a quorum on the committee.
Doris, can you hear us? I think
She's muted.
Is that Doris there?
she
The number ending in 705?
yeah,
Okay.
I believe so.
But it's still muted.
Doris, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
How are you?
Pretty good.
Good.
Limping, but outside of that, I'm pretty good.
Oh no. New limping or continuing to limp?
I'm still continuing to limp.
Oh. I'd like to get one more land use committee member, at least. David, hi. Josh, can you elevate John Paul, please?
Hello?
Hi there. Yes, is that done? Thank you. All right, with that, I think we'll call the meeting to order. This is the September meeting of the Land Use and Housing Committee of CB2. My name is Frederica Siegel, and I can see that we're all here except for Sandy and Anita and Katie, who are excused. Tonight is a discussion of the Loft Board, its history and its purpose, and its plans to make rule changes to its administrative code. This was a process that began a couple of years ago. We thought at one point that perhaps they would finalize the rule changes and send them out of committee at their meeting later this month. That seems like it's not going to happen. But it's a good thing for us to get our arms around this topic, because my impression is that either you know everything about the Loft Board or you know nothing about it. And we have some very knowledgeable people here with us. The point of the meeting tonight is to share the history, as I said, and get a little bit of a grounding in what the purpose is, and then develop a set of questions that will inform our discussion going forward. But there's really no point in delving into the intricacies of the rules when we don't know what their final comments are going to be. And so I hope that you will bear with me. Josh, the host disabled participant screen sharing, but I would like to share my screen. Okay, great, thanks. Hope this is visible for everybody. And forgive me, I tried to make this as pithy as I could. I know that we sent some materials out to the committee, but I thought it would be good to distill this and just make sure we're all on the same page. So the Loft Board was created in 1982 by New York State, not by New York City. It passed the Article 7C of the multiple dwelling law. And the state law established the city's Loft Board, which the point of which was to coordinate the conversion of the apartments or the lofts in the spaces in the commercial and manufacturing buildings so that they would be safe. And they had to comply with minimum standards of safety and fire. And they were known as the interim multiple dwellings. The two most common conversion options for these units were either to pass into rent stabilization or to become owner-occupied co-ops. And they both have been a source of affordable housing in our district. Let's not confuse the Loft Board with joint live work quarters for artists, which began not in 82, but in 71, and is a provision of the zoning, the city's zoning resolution. We're not discussing joint live work quarters for artists tonight. And attendant to that is the fact that the loft law does not require people in lofts to be certified artists. As I said, that's a requirement of the zoning resolution. So the rent stabilized units are administered by the state and they are monitored by the city. And when it began, the loft law applied to buildings that had 3 or more independent residents, where people were in residence from the middle of 1980 until the end of 81. In June of 2010, they amended the law to include units in commercial and manufacturing buildings that didn't have a C of O, and where 3 or more families had been in residence from the beginning of 80 until the end of 81. And then they amended the law further in 2013, 2015, and in 2019, most recently, the law was amended for the period of, January 2015 and 2016. And the New York City DOB oversees the Loft Board. So their activities are to mediate disputes between owners and tenants, to track the progress of the buildings as they go through the legalization process, and to prosecute the parties who violate the Loft Board rules. And I guess that would be tenants and landlords. So in if you recall, some of the people who are on this committee now were on the committee in 2015, when we were seeing a lot of applications for where there were joint live work quarters for artists units where we were not sure how they had been disposed of. And at that time, we invited the Loft Board to come to our meetings and to help us through this process and to kind of sensitize the applicants to the fact that they had to explain the disposition of these units. So at that time, they published in list form the list of 331 IMD buildings that had not been processed. And since that time, 9 buildings with a total of 26 units in Soho and NoHo have been added, and 3 buildings with a total of 9 units, I'm sorry, they've been removed, and 3 buildings with 9 units have been added. So as of today, the information that I got from the Loft Board is that 401 units in 231 buildings in CB2 have been processed. But that is a little bit misleading because units that move, that are disqualified or where the landlord bought out the tenant or other extenuating circumstances, that number has not been, to date, we have not been able to get that number from the Loft Board. So at this point, the number of 401 units is it's a little low. And currently, there are 475 units in 87 buildings in CB2 that have not yet been processed. So, wrapping up, these are the areas of proposed changes that the Loft Board is envisioning. Section 2, which is code compliance deadlines. Section 3, extensions of time to achieve code compliance. And of course, as many of you know, some of these buildings have been in the pipeline since 1980. So whether they need further extensions more than, what, 40 years? I don't know, but we'll discuss that. Addition of a glossary with definitions, reorganization of the text so that it lines up better, sorry, with other parts of the text. Provisions for buildings that have been added as a result of the amendments and the addition of units, and adjustments to the protocols to assure that buildings move through the Loft Board. So I'll leave that up, and I'd like to open up the meeting to comments by committee members. And as I say, since we don't know exactly what changes they're going to make, it's hard to drill down and be specific. But I know that some of you live in lofts, and I'd like to hear your questions and hear your reactions to this little synopsis. You can unmute yourselves, I believe.
Well, I want to thank you. Could I begin to speak?
Oh, Sean, I'm glad that you're on. Yes.
Yeah, it took me a couple of minutes. Yeah, hi.
Thank you.
Oh, there I am. Okay. Thank you. Wow, I'm very impressed with all the work you did, Frederica. This is really you did a lot of research here. I just want to comment. I think we should strongly support the loft law because I was not affected by it. If I could just give a minute or two summary of my experience with it. I moved into Soho in '77 and I was paying $200 for a studio in the village, very tiny. And for $300, I got a loft so big that my girlfriend's kids came around, I could roller skate in it. And it was wonderful for 4 years, but we had no, the whole Pioneer story, there was no heat on the weekends, it was freezing. We had to there was no intercom, we had to throw the keys down, but we were all happy and the landlord was happy and there was industry as well, light industry. Then it got popular, Soho, and in '81, the old immigrant from Poland who had it since before the war sold it to Futterman, the developer, and he said, oh, you guys have commercial leases, we're not going to renew that. But we say, we're residents. So long story short, in our building, which is now the Mercer Hotel, by the way, we went on rent strike, and this was no loft law at the time, and we were facing eviction. And I guess rather than prolong the rent strike for years, which a lot of people were doing before the loft law, we got a small settlement, and I moved to Mitchell-Lama at Independence Plaza North, which was also very cheap. I think $87 a month for a small studio. Fortunately, I found a building, the less cheap building around the corner, and we developed it where I now live in. But my point is, the other people in my building were not so lucky to have that, find that Mitchell Llama the same week they had to move out of their place. And I'm sure that I've never seen them around. They've been dispersed, I guess, from the city. Then the loft law came, and people who were being dispersed from affordable housing remained. By 1983 or 4, whenever it went into effect, people who were covered by it are still living there now. So we're talking about affordable housing in the city, and the loft law is one of a shining example of how something that really works. Because even Mitchell Llama doesn't work anymore. Independence Plaza got bought out, and now it's market rate. So I would have had to move out of there. So I think we should strongly support anything that would weaken the loft law we have to oppose, and anything that would strengthen and clarify it should be encouraged.
Thanks a lot, John.
Frederica, I have a question.
Yes?
I had my hand up. Frederica, one thing I've never understood about the loft law, which came after I had completed my work in Soho on the zoning and wasn't too involved in, is there a time limit that a building can be an IMD, or does it, can it go on forever? Is there anywhere, and I've never found that in the rules or regulations, that there is a time limit?
They, I believe that I shared with the committee the 2 spreadsheets that the Loft Board interim executive director sent over.
Right.
And there are, on the list of current IMDs, there are units that registered in 1983. So the answer, I guess, is no, not yet.
So I'm wondering, and I'm hoping that that's not the case, knowing how important it is, that they will not be changing that and will not be requiring a time limit and will be allowing IMDs to remain indefinitely, because it is a very important source of
go.
Michael?
I think things should just, I mean, this is a question, not an opinion. Should these units just languish in the Loft Board for endless amounts of time, or is the idea to move them along through that pipeline into either co-op, owner-owned co-ops or rent stabilization? It seems to me that the longer they're in limbo there in the Loft Board, the easier it is for the applicants, the developers, to kind of obscure their history and find a way to move them out of the Loft Board without moving them into rent stabilization. I'd like to hear other people's opinion of that.
I haven't heard that.
I was going to just say, Michael, that that one of the things is that until the units are moved into rent stabilization, the tenants are not protected under any of the rent stabilization guidelines, and instead they're under the interim protection, and they don't have the long-term rights. And so there's really no benefit to the tenants, which the IMD was established, that status was created to allow them to continue being there. But the landlord never brought the properties up to the proper standards. So it can languish in a livable situation, so to speak, but not necessarily at the standard of what a living situation should be.
Yes.
But again, if I can just finish the thought, to finish the conversion of the building so that they would qualify for rent stabilization would be very costly, and would it not be the case that the owner of the building would pass on the increase in the cost to the tenants there, which would make it a disincentive to bring it into rent stabilization? It's the negative side of bringing them out of IMD. I've often wondered how that would work. To whose benefit would that work?
I can answer some of the questions about it.
Sorry?
When you're done, I just wanted to give Michael some information to help him be more clear.
Mm-hmm. Please.
Oh, well, 2 things. First, we are concerned. One of the things we've heard that might be against what we would like to see as a change in the loft law is what you mentioned, which is leaving an open end for the landlords to finish up the process. And that's something that they've obviously been fighting for. So we are worried a bit about that. In the loft law as it is now, I mean, you're right, it's a choice. I mean, the tenants do pay a percentage of the cost for legalizing. And there's a formula. I mean, it happened in my building as well. And you pay it out over a period of time, 5 or 10 years, I forget what it is. And it can be really substantial. And that, I mean, it was substantial for us too, but some buildings just can't afford it. You know, it's a tricky situation. Sometimes the tenants can't afford it and sometimes the landlords can't. I mean, that's not a lot of buildings, but it's the ones that are sort of more of a wrecks. But yeah, we have to watch this very closely. I'm Sean's neighbor. I moved in 1978. I know this very well. Yeah, we just have to keep fighting. This is so important to us. This is our affordable housing. And one thing we know from last year's Soho NoHo public sessions is there are a lot more people than the other side, so to speak, has presented in their positions about it. I mean, there are still a lot of people here who live under that protection, and that's really important.
Well, okay, Susan, you make a lot of good points, but rather than say that there's more people than the other side thinks, I think it's more a case that the way the records have been kept by the Loft Board, it's hard to tell how many people there actually are.
Yes, and they play it down.
Yes, and it's not really a them and us thing. It's just
Exactly. No, exactly.
And I think that our questions to them that resulted in the information that I presented, I think maybe we'll be able to, between our efforts and their efforts, we'll maybe be able to clarify that. However, there's another issue, which is that once the unit is processed and it's no longer under the jurisdiction of the Loft Board, it's supposed to move to the, if you recall, when we had the Loft Board woman come, we had also a representative DHCR, which is the agency that the lofts are supposed to move into the jurisdiction of once they're rent stabilized. But doesn't seem to be any mechanism or follow-up to make sure that people just don't languish in between the Loft Board and the HCR. So I don't know if anybody has any feelings about that, but that's an issue in my mind. Other committee members who have questions?
I was just going to encourage people to take a look at the map that's linked. Let's see if I can put this up here, that shows all the IMD buildings in CB2. I think that that's very illustrative for those who aren't aware of just how many buildings there are. Let me just get that up.
Well, I think I said, Carter, that at present there's 87 buildings in CB2 that have yet to be processed.
Right. I'm just saying, just people aren't aware of just how many buildings there are in their area often times when you look at the map, but I'll throw it up here in just a second when I get it here.
So these code compliance deadlines, I believe that, I'm not sure what the difference is between Section 2 and Section 3 because deadlines and extensions of time are linked together. But there was a requirement that landlords send in reports. It could have been monthly. They might now want to make it quarterly. I'm not sure about that. But the issue of how long these, Michael, as usual, you bring up a salient point, which is, should there be a limit or not? It's a sword that cuts both ways. And I don't know if we want to think about whether we want to have a position on that or not. But that, to my mind, is, that's important to think about.
You know, I see we have a number of attendees with us who, and I think some of them were involved in this process from very early on. An interesting question for them would be, would they have ever envisioned that in those two windows in the early 80s where places would comply to fall under this, if they ever envisioned that IMD status would still be in the mix in 2020? I think 20 years ago when I first became aware of this, people were thinking, well, these buildings should be coming out of this status shortly. And still, 20 years later, here we are, and 40 years later, it's a little bit astounding. And I'm curious, with Susan's comments are great comments of people coming, some buildings still aren't able to afford to come out of that is an interesting comment when this was supposed to have already all happened, decades ago. And I guess it just sort of leads to what benefit are these changes going to bring to people who are still living in limbo in IMD buildings? And is there a justification to hold them in that for the tenants? I mean, status, and, most of the landlords either have had possession of these buildings and they've been very fortunate to have had the status continue, or they have purchased the buildings with that status, knowing that that impedes their building. But I mean, what are the rules going to do to make this a better situation for tenants, and specifically, but then also, I guess, the landlords?
Frederica, I'm not sure if you're going to call on people or not. I just wanted to make sure you
Yes.
saw the hand.
I'm looking for hands up. But yes, please.
So I just wanted to share that even with buildings at least in the Soho area that have, wanted to and paid, and the co-op has been completely wanting to get things fixed from historical records, faces huge obstacles. Like our building tried for many years to get something. We had a massive financial incentive to get it done with expediters and everything, and it still didn't get done. And we're still waiting for it like 5 years later. So even when there's the resources, the intent, the incentive, everything, the time delays that happen via the city inexplicably, even with expediters, private expediters involved, is astounding. And
your expediter was able to put the blame firmly on the city and not on the landlord?
But guys, just before we go on, in co-ops, these rules don't apply to co-ops.
No. I'm just saying that when you're trying to go through legalization processes through DOB, even if you're in, maybe the Loft law is not people involved in this are not hiring expediters too, but I think the long timelines, would maybe behoove us to find out an explanation from the Loft Board specifically why the timelines are so long. Is it in fact because people are not applying? Is it the cost? Or is it because it's just, nobody at the city is particularly incentivized to put this on the priority list, and they have a lot of other things they're going? We need to know what that is. Because if in fact they're just not attending to it and there are applications, then that's something, I would support encouraging the city to prioritize that. Or if it's truly a cost matter, then when we're looking at, policies around affordability, that's something that maybe relief should be provided.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But if we don't know what it is, it's very difficult to address. And I just, from my experience of doing other things, sometimes just the delays are astounding.
Okay. So that's a good question for the list. Donna, did you have a question? You want to unmute?
Yeah, I just want to say, we went through this back around 2010, 2012, over on Gansevoort Street. And my husband had been living there since 1969. And, there was never an issue or anything. If we didn't have that Loft Board, we would not be living there now. Fortunately, he keeps everything. And, he was there during all those time periods. He had records of everybody else who was there during those time periods. And so we're there now. So I want to second what Sean said about how important this is for people. And then also, Frederica, what you were saying about what happens to the building now once it's come into compliance. We're not listed on there. Nobody knows that happened. If we're not there tomorrow, what's going to happen to that space that makes it affordable for somebody to still be living in this area? So I think that's something we really should address.
Okay, thank you.
As a clarification question, Frederica, because is your bill, you're now rent stabilized though, right? Because you've gone through the process. So you're no longer under the jurisdiction of that. And
Correct.
rent stabilized units are not listed by DHCR. They only list the buildings, I think, as a public list of which buildings may have rent stabilized units, and they may not even include loft buildings on that list. So that's considered private information. at this point. And that's been one of our biggest issues in our community, is the hemorrhaging of rent stabilized apartments, is that we don't know what's on there and what's been deregulated. So the point is that once it moves into rent stabilization, that's a different process than what we're talking about now, because it's completed
And gone.
this status and gone and moved out of it.
All right, Carter, you're saying that HCR does not list loft buildings?
I don't know if they do. I think that the list that they made list loft, I mean, I don't know. There's a list that's available on the DHCR website, I believe, that lists all buildings that may contain rent stabilized units, but it does not, it says may because I believe it's static. And so I don't think that they add on loft buildings as they come out of IMD status. I don't think they're adding anything. I think it's under the typical or the other regime of rent stabilization, which is 6 or more units built after whatever year it was, 1970, 1969. I think that's all that's included on there. But we've never been able to find out how many registered rent stabilized units there are in CB2 at any given time period, and particularly to show how many we've lost in the last 20 to 30 years. I mean, we've lost more rent stabilized apartments than you could ever imagine building in our community in the last 20 to 30 years. So that's why it's so important to get everybody through the process of the protections.
Okay, John Paul? Did you want to speak?
Yeah, hi, thank you. I was just looking at Carter's link that he had sent, and it speaks to the milestones. And because one of my questions was, what do they actually have to do to convert? I want just more detail on that. And just looking through it quickly, it kind of, under milestones, I guess, goes through this process. But just as I'm quickly reading that, what is the incentive for the landlord to make these changes and bring in people? Can you help me understand, like, why would I not just leave it alone if I'm a landlord? Why would I incur the cost and the headache to make that? And so that's just my question, I guess, for the speak to that.
John, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I know. I wish I knew better. I'm really not an expert on the loft law. I don't know why some landlords go ahead and do it and others don't. And I've never really found out why, and no one has ever called the Alliance to complain about it. So I really don't know. Maybe Donna, do you know? Oh, Donna's.
I wonder if it has to do with not getting a certificate of occupancy.
That's also true. Because some of these.
I'm not sure that's.
My understanding, if I can pipe in here, and I may not be 100% correct, is that there are financial considerations. To go through the conversion process means that it's possible to seek a mortgage or refinancing from a bank, and you cannot do that until you've completed the process. So there may be financial incentives to the owner of the building who wants to do improvement, who wants to clear up violations, who wants to refinance a mortgage, to go through the process so legally they can obtain the kind of financing they need from banks. I believe that that's one of the major incentives to upgrade the housing from IND to a point where it would then qualify as a legal residential unit and is no longer in the IMD pipeline. That's my understanding of what the reason is that the landlord or a co-op would have an incentive to complete the process, as expensive as it is.
Thank you, Michael. Susan, did you want to say something? You have to unmute, Susan.
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted. I mean, of course, what Michael's saying is exactly right. I mean, if there was no incentive for the landlords, they wouldn't do it, other than it is kind of law abiding. But in an answer to your question earlier about why should we think these units should be, become ultimately stabilized, and it's what Sean said in the beginning, is that it's the biggest protection that the residents can have. And, unless there are circumstances where the buildings just don't want it or can't afford it, which I really would believe is a small percentage, it's so important, because with what happened last year in Albany when they strengthened the rent regulations, now these are permanently protected places. So that has to be our goal.
But isn't that conversely motivating to the landlords? don't to some extent they don't want to
Of
be?
course it is. It's a blow to the landlords.
Right. So I guess it goes by. So why is a landlord then, would I go through all these efforts?
Well, what Michael said, I think is right. It's the only reason I mean, they have less incentive now because they can't keep raising the rent, but they still have to get tax advantages and loan advantages. Otherwise they wouldn't do it. So we can't
has to
guess
be some
exactly the reason
liability.
it's going to make sense.
Right? You have people living there, what in essence is illegally.
But they're under some rubric that the city or state created. So I'm sure there's some protection. They're just in this process, like this interim phase. I guess without a sunset, they're going to stay there. My other note was just,
it increases the value of the building. When they sell the building, it's fully legalized. You know, it's really, I mean, that's what we feel. I mean, there aren't a lot, you know, what you're talking about is really the ultimate pro-landlord position, which we know, and that's why it was a blow to that part of their, you know, the real estate interests when the rent regulation law was very strongly enforced in Albany. And that was a win for tenants, but landlords see that as a blow. But
yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is the motivations here. And if now on the heels of that tenant progress, that now they're bringing up something else that's been largely ignored for at least the last 10 years, assuming 10 years was the original like timeline they expected. I'm just wondering what they're going to try to introduce as changes and what the motivations on that would be. I also had a question about like the audit process here. They say they had these applications. Someone was talking, maybe it was Carol, about, Miss Dawson, excuse me, like how long these take to go through. I wonder if I put an application as a landlord trying to work in good faith, but it gets kicked back from the city or the state, I guess. You know, at what point is that then a new application? Because wouldn't you want to know like what's the oldest application out there? and I'm just wondering how they count that and when they start counting that from. So in terms of your questions, Frederica, maybe that'd be something that I'd be curious how they quantify the number of applicants, but also the age of them.
The age. You mean the length of time in the process?
Right. I mean, I would hope they would track it by building a.
That is on the spreadsheet that I sent out.
Oh, okay.
It shows when they started the process. Mm-hmm.
But is each denial a new application? Like, does it restart?
Okay, that's okay. Okay. Any more questions from the committee? Okay, we have a number of attendees and perhaps some questions there. Gilda? Can you unmute yourself, Gilda?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'm in an IMD building. I'm now the only loft tenant in the building. And there have been a number of landlords. And in the beginning, there were 3 units. And we were very much in line for moving this along. And then with going from one landlord to another, it just sort of dissipated. The whole effort dissipated. And, you know, I don't even know that there are any records at this point on what kind of improvements would fit under that have been made, would fit under this effort to reach rent stabilization. And so, you know, it's an IMD building. I'm protected by that. But I doubt very much that the landlord has any interest in doing more than he's done to make it habitable and to rent out the other units. And I doubt that he has long-term ambitions for this building. So, you know, I would certainly hope that tenants in my situation and myself would be protected would continue to be protected simply by being IMD status. Waiting.
Well, one of the points that that one of the attendees makes in the chat is that an incentive to bringing the building up to code is that the owner can raise the rent. So if they actually go through the process, there is the opportunity to move the rent up. And I guess the person who wrote said her rent was frozen for 20 years during the time that they were IMD units.
So what happens if they do nothing? Where does it leave? Where does it leave?
The rent is frozen, if that's true. Are there any other attendees who would like to ask questions?
I was just going to bring up a good point is that we heard in this example that 2 other units were lost during this process that could have qualified as eventually becoming rent stabilized units. And that's the time. The time is an issue in that case, in that if people leave, the units are no longer protected. Once that original person or somebody who's had succession to that unit is gone.
Yes, those other 2 units of the building are no longer under the loft law. I don't know whether they're legally no longer under the loft law, but at any rate, they've been functioning as no longer under the loft law. It's only my unit.
So you don't know if the people didn't, I mean, did they not meet the residency requirement? Was there?
No, they chose to leave.
So if they came to an arrangement with the landlord to leave, it could be any number of reasons, Frederica, but the point is once you leave, that continuous occupancy since 81 or 84, those 2 narrow windows is lost.
Right.
And the claim would disappear. Or if somebody ripped out, for example, all the fixtures in a unit right after somebody moved out, it sort of would, there's all kinds of things that go on in units that are under contention.
I assume those other units are no longer protected by the loft law, but mine is under the IMD, and whether it's in the present state of the building, I have no idea whether it could be approved for rent stabilized status or not. But I don't know that there are any records of what was done when and by whom. And
right, and that was something we encountered back in 2015, that there were, they just had no history.
Gilda, does your landlord rent those other units out?
Yes.
To residents?
Not sure whether the others are residents, but there are businesses of one sort or another that are rented out.
And presumably at market rate, correct? They're not in.
Probably.
All right, well, are there any more discussion, any further questions?
Can I just add that I would hope that those of us in my situation, and I'm sure there are many, would be protected by the state.
Okay, thank you, Gilda. So it's not clear whether we'll be discussing this in October or in November, but this is a good start. And I really, if people want to drill down, it is possible to find the rules, the Loft Board rules online. And if, as I suggested in my little presentation, we focus for the time being on sections 2 and 3, the code compliance deadlines and the extension of time to achieve code compliance, then anyone who wants to become familiar with what the rules are might aid us in our understanding of what their proposed changes are. But other than that, I don't think that there's anything we should do until we find out what their plans are. And next month we'll have a couple of 74-711s. And so it would be good if this actually, it does get held over until November. So
I think
Carter,
Pete has his hand up.
sorry, Pete.
Hi, yeah, thank you. And thank you for bringing this meeting together. I live in a loft building where we were in the process for nearly 20 years and finally got legalized and got our rent stabilized leases, but that was only because we filed many actions against the owner of our building who we did not feel was complying with the timelines in the loft law. It's very onerous for tenants to pursue that course, but sometimes it's necessary. Just so everybody knows, there are hardship applications that an owner can take advantage of should it be needed. There's also a fine structure that if an owner is out of compliance, fines can be levied to compel them to move forward. Also, everybody should understand that almost every loft tenant was there originally because of a contract with the owner of the building, a lease of some sort. So what the loft law attempted to do and what the Loft Board does is to make sure that those tenants who are fulfilled, do meet the requirements to be covered by the loft law, then move forward. So, and it's also important for everybody to understand that what the Loft Board is contemplating now are changes to the rules of the Loft Board and not the loft law. The loft law is done by the New York State Legislature. These are rules to administer the loft law. And there are, because laws are written the way they are, there are some vagaries in there that the board then clarifies and puts in place to make sure the machine that the law put in place moves towards the end. And if I could just read one little quote from, this is from 2009, when Mayor Bloomberg moved the Loft Board from being its own separate agency into the Department of Buildings, where it now sits. It's overseen by the Department of Buildings. And this is a statement from the gentleman who was then the chair of the Loft Board, Mark Rauch. And he said at that time, under the mayor's guidance, the Loft Board has taken tremendous strides towards its goal of ensuring safe and affordable housing for New York City loft residents. And in a nutshell, that is what the Loft Board does. They try to administer it in a way that the housing ends up safe and the end game of those rental tenants is that they move into rent stabilization. And that's about all I have to say right now.
I have a question for Pete, if I may, Frederica. To follow up on what you said, Pete, yes, the loft law is state legislation, but the rules are city administrative code. Where in either one are there timelines for compliance, if such a thing exists? That's the one thing that's always confused me. Where can you find timelines for compliance? Are you aware of that?
That is in the section of the law. And then the way that that is administered to make sure that the time frames are met is dealt with in the rules, is my understanding.
So therefore, we're not looking at changes in the timeline, but we're looking at ways in which the Loft Board would administer the compliance with the timelines. if we understand what will be happening.
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
But the difference to the tenant is, I think, negligible. So just a point of, I mentioned two spreadsheets. One is a spreadsheet of buildings and units that have been processed, and the other one is buildings and units that have not been processed. And yes, what I'm hoping that we can do with our new website is to have a page for the land use committee that will have all these documents together on this topic. But in the meantime, all you have to do is go on the Loft Board website, and there's an interactive map which shows you every building and where it stands in the process and how many units are affected. However, one of the applications that I think we'll be hearing next month, 5 Mercer, when you look on the Loft Board list, it shows 5 IMD units, and when you read the application for the 74-711, there's more than 5. So I think the whole system is rife with inconsistencies. So does anyone have anything more that they want to add? Carter, did you want to say anything?
You know, I was just going to point out, I've been going through some of the old board materials from the late 70s and early 80s. And, you know, it's fascinating today. We think we can find everything in just a couple minutes, you know, it's online somewhere, whatever it may be. We had typists, you know, at the community board office back then. The 6th precinct, I think we covered them to get a computer with some funds from the computer board. I mean, from the community board. And just to give a sense of, so when we talk about information going back to that time period and its continuance through today, we have to be a little bit cognizant that it's not perfect and that a lot of these records are retained in city agencies in paper format on microfiche. And so just to your point, Frederica, you're right. There's probably a lot of information that's not quite correct, but we have to remember just how long this process has been going on.
Yes.
To really comprehend why this is so complicated, why there are records missing, why, you know, there's all kinds of issues, records of whether the units were occupied or not. I mean, that was a big thing in the community board minutes of demonstrating whether or not the units were actually occupied at that time. And that was a couple of years after the fact. Mm. It's interesting to watch that and then see where we are now, where we expect all this information to be perfect when it came out of a very different time period.
All right. So I think that's it. I want to say thanks to Stephanie Chan in the Borough President's office, to Anthony Drummond in Councilmember Chin's office, and to Charlie Anderson in Assemblymember Glick's office for attending. I hope I didn't miss anybody. I believe that next month we'll be meeting on October 7th instead of the usual October 14th. And please put that on your calendar. And thanks for all the help, Josh, and also Carter. And see you at the board meeting, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Bye-bye.